Hi there guys, and welcome to another episode of the Cover Zero Show with me, your host Simon Conboy. Weekly review episode today, this being the week of the 19th of May 2017. So for those of you who haven't seen one of these before, I'll just be going over the week's news, which of course at this time of year is not particularly much. This week I'm going to be going through some of the upcoming free agents, players that have options that I feel teams need to prioritise getting re-signed as soon as possible. Otherwise, I feel they could become an issue at some point for the franchise in the future, if they're not already. And then I'll be going through my top 10 exterior pass rushers currently in the NFL. So in terms of this week, as I say, not a huge amount to report. Ladarius Green, the tight end, has been cut from the Steelers. Was signed to a large contract last season. I thought he was going to be a real breakout star for them, but unfortunately injuries have cut his time there short. It saves them a fair bit of money over the next few years. This is simply an unfortunate situation where the player hasn't been able to get healthy. The team's decided to cut their losses rather than taking a chance on him. It's still going to be an explosive offense. I don't see this having a drastic effect on the Steelers in the long run. Hopefully Green can get healthy and find a way to be a contributor elsewhere. LeGarrette Blount has finally signed with the Philadelphia Eagles, and this was a huge need in Philadelphia. Whilst Blount did have a great season last year with New England, I still feel like he's a fairly limited runner. Now, this is a good signing. The Eagles had a huge need at that position. I don't think they can rely on the guys they have. Blount will give them a legitimate power game up the middle. Not particularly explosive player, and I think that is the one area that will be lacking in this offense, which looks pretty good now. If Wentz can take another step forward in his development or two, then this team could be a lot better. It's a perfectly reasonable deal, so it makes a lot of sense. If there was one team that you could see making the most use out of signing LeGarrette Blount, it would certainly be the Eagles. So I think this makes a lot of sense for both sides. We'll see what he can do. I think he'll be moderately productive, but I would not expect to see anything like what we saw last year. And the other news, Derek Carr's apparently starting to grow frustrated with the length of time taken to negotiate a new contract. This is something that will no doubt get done, and this segues into my next segment. So guys who need to be paid, Derek Carr is number one on my list for that. I haven't even numbered him, but he's definitely number one, of course. Last year was absolutely fantastic, a legitimate MVP candidate. The Raiders need to get this done and locked down as soon as possible. I mean, I can understand why they might want to try and keep it till next year, maybe keep that, but this cap number is going to be, a real albatross. Unfortunately, when you do get that quarterback, it does hinder your ability to build around him. I think we can see with the Ravens, and even to a lesser degree with the Packers and the Colts, it can be difficult managing the cap once you do have that quarterback under that kind of number. We've seen the Redskins trying to everything in their power to avoid doing so with Kirk Cousins. Unfortunately, it's unavoidable. So that absolutely needs to be done. I mentioned Kirk Cousins. They need to get something done there. Whilst I don't think Kirk Cousins is a top 10 quarterback in this league, he's not far off, and the odds of finding somebody better are incredibly small. He's good enough to get this team to the playoffs as long as the pieces are around him. He knows that system well. They'll be productive as long as he's in Washington. They absolutely need to get that done. I think next year will be their last chance to do so, of course, and he'll have plenty of suitors. Of course, San Fran probably being the most notable among them, with Kyle Shanahan being the head coach. This absolutely needs to get done. That's really it for the quarterbacks. In terms of receivers, we've got a few, a lot of them from the same draft class. Mike Evans needs to be extended by Tampa. They've just got to get that done as soon as. It seems like that's going to get done. Both sides have been very adamant that's something that's going to happen. DeAndre Hopkins as well for the Texans. They need to just get this one out of the way. I think the team that gets this done first, there are a few receivers coming up, but these, you've got these guys, Odell Beckham. that was a great draft class. These guys are all going to get paid, and they're probably going to get paid around near the leagues, possibly the highest paid. Actually, I could see that happening. So they're going to be the highest paid players at the position. I think the team that gets it done first will probably end up getting the best deal. So I feel like you just want to get that done. Hopkins, of course, held out last season. I don't think it impacted it. It was all. I'll put it on Brock Osweiler for his statistical struggles, but he's a great player. Still very young. These are easy decisions that you'd think for a front office, but sometimes they do drag their feet and allow these things to become situations. Allen Robinson in Jacksonville, I don't think he's not going to command the same kind of money, and I'm not sure he's a true number one, but he certainly has produced at a level where he deserves to be paid in the 10 mil a year kind of range. You'd think it's essential they keep him going forward. Hearns are going to be the focal point of that passing game, or at least they should be. So get that one done. David Johnson, simply because at some point, considering his draft position, he'll be. I don't think they can do the contract now, but next off season they need to get that done as soon as possible. If he continues to produce at that level, whilst he's a running back, I think he's going to start being in a position where he can demand more than the other running backs are getting due to the amount he's used in the receiving game. They're just going to have to get that done. Barring injury, I don't see this guy slowing down, considering the quality of play that he received around him and the rest of that offense last year. That absolutely needs to get done as soon as they possibly can. Other than that, not a huge amount of running backs. I think Stafford, that needs to be redone as well. Last year, I think he really produced his most productive pro season as a quarterback without Calvin Johnson. Statistically, not his most impressive year, but in terms of watching the games, by far the best that he's played. He cut out a lot of the errors that he was making. Decision making improved vastly. And again, this is a guy that had very little help. You can't allow this franchise. At the minute, I think this is a fairly flawed roster. Good offensive line. Stafford's been very good, but I think there's a lot of holes there. If Stafford, anything goes wrong there, this team is back in rebuild mode. They've got to get that done as soon as. Other receivers, we've got Jarvis Landry. Absolutely needs to be done. Criminally underpaid at the moment. He's been incredibly productive since he got to Miami. I think this is a difficult one because he does operate mostly out of the slot and he doesn't get a huge amount of big plays down the field. So I think they may struggle to... This will get done, but I think it's very difficult to slot him. That was a good double meaning I had there, but to slot him in terms of what he should be paid. So I think that one may drag out a little bit, but it has to get done. He's been the most consistent player this team's had on offense for a few years. Seems like a real leader in the locker room. So that one needs to get done. Taylor Lewan for the Titans. This one's going to cost them, you'd think. Left tackles, of course, always very highly paid. He's still a young, ascending player, and I think last year was his best season. This offensive line needs to be kept intact. It's the strength of this team, and particularly with how they're looking to build and this exotic smash mouth that they're doing. This one needs to get done. He seems like the leader of that offense as well. Mariota doesn't seem like a vocal sort of leader. No doubt, as a quarterback, he's got leadership qualities. But I think in terms of the face of that offense for his teammates, that's Taylor Lewan. So they need to get that done. Again, his price could only increase if they let this one drag on. Xavier Rhodes, I think the Vikings need to get this one done ASAP. Had a great season last year. Really increased his value. If they allow this one to keep on going, again, this is a player with another very productive Pro Bowl type caliber season. His value is only going to increase significantly. At this point, I think you'd have to pay him a large amount for a long-term contract, but if he has another good year, you're going to be looking at having to pay him in the range that Patrick Peterson and those sorts of guys are being paid. So I think they want to get that one out of the way. You can't let him leave the building. It's damn hard to find them top corners. Devonta Freeman, I don't think this one's necessarily essential, The team needs to think about it because, of course, he's such a big part of that offense. Him and Coleman form a fantastic tandem. If he does want to be paid as highly as he says, I think that the Falcons may consider cutting ties with him. They need to make a decision, I think, early at this point so that they can start to prepare for life without him. If they're going to get it done, I think get it done, or it might be a distraction. Especially with a runner, I think you want to keep them happy, because if they start running with a little bit less effort, it makes all the difference in the world. Not saying that that's something he would do, but I think something you've got to be aware of. Willie Snead, I'm not sure when his contract is up with New Orleans, but he's going to be, he deserves to be paid like a solid contributing wide receiver. He's become a very good player in New Orleans. A Ziggy Ansah, this is a tough one because last year, of course, his numbers weren't good, missed a large chunk of the season with injury, but at the end of the day, this is an incredibly talented pass rusher who's developed probably a bit quicker than I would have expected, considering his lack of football experience before coming into the NFL. He's got the potential to be one of the top 3 or 4 edge rushers in a 4-3 scheme. These guys don't come around often unless you're drafting high. You tend not to find them. They're just going to have to pay him. This defence is pretty bad as well. I mean, him and Slay are the only 2 players you can point to at the minute and say they're absolute difference makers. So they need to keep him around. It's not a great defensive front there in Detroit. So that's another one. Absolutely needs to be done. And finally, another edge rusher, Melvin Ingram. Well, finally in terms of the edge rushers, Melvin Ingram. The strength of this Chargers team, whilst I think the offense has improved massively, as I've discussed previously, and could be quite good this year, the strength is going to be the defence, and I think it will start with Bosa and Ingram. Get Ingram re-signed. Stop messing around with his franchise stuff. Just get it done. Price tag's only going to go up, especially if his sack numbers increase, which they may well do with Bosa on the other side, helping terrorise opposing QBs. And then 2 other players, both in the NFC West, and I think these are essential. Eric Reid, he's not lit the world on fire in his time in San Fran, but he has been a solid player for them. This team's thoroughly in a rebuild, getting rid of solid young players, especially safeties. I think it's hard to find decent ones in this league. You got to keep him around. And similarly, Alec Ogletree for the Rams. I think he'll be dynamite in this new scheme. I think he's been a solid player for them before. Again, maybe not quite lived up to what you'd necessarily hope for from a first rounder, but he's certainly been a very good player, and I think they just need to get it done. The defence, again, is going to be the strength of this team. Keep that intact and just try and build that offence whilst maintaining the young talent that you've got defensively. So there we go. Those are some players that I just think teams need to really get on the ball with. Should have checked Willie Snead's contract situation. Actually, I'm not too sure on where he stands with the franchise, but he certainly needs to be paid if he's not being. But yeah, that's my list. Any issues with it, give us a shout, as always. So I'm going to move on to this week's top 10 players in the NFL list. I'm going to be continuing to do this until all the positions are done on the regular season starts. I don't know which comes first, actually. I've not planned it out that far. But yeah, today, exterior pass rushers. So 4-3 defensive ends, 3-4 outside backers. Anyone who's used primarily to rush from the outside, not necessarily the inside. JJ Watt does not qualify for this list, for example. I consider him an interior pass rusher primarily. Of course, he is used as a traditional end and as an exterior rusher at times, but I don't believe that to be his primary role, for example. So, coming in at number 10 on my list, last year's sack leader, Vic Beasley. Now, I ummed and ahed sort of over putting him on this list because whilst it is a list of edge rushers, I value an all-round game very highly. So there are some maybe designated sack specialists such as Beasley, who I don't think play the run that well, that do not make this list for that reason. So Beasley's probably the exception. At the end of the day, he led the league in sacks. I kind of have no choice but to put him on this list. He's a classic speed rusher. Added some moves this year. I think having Dwight Freeney in that locker room really helped in terms of, probably helped him with film study and just improving his overall technique and it showed this year, particularly in the stats. I don't think he's as consistent a pass rusher. Whilst the sack numbers were there, I don't think he's necessarily as consistent as some of the top guys on this list. But, it was only his second year. Still feel he needs to bulk up a bit. Otherwise, I'm not sure he's ever going to be able to have the kind of impact. Like, if you think to James Harrison at that position, the kind of stopping ability where you can just take a tackle on head on, he's not got that at this point. He does get overwhelmed in the run game, isn't the best at setting contain, and can be quite undisciplined in that regard. Needs to improve that area of his game to get any higher on this list. But at this point, I'm sure the Falcons are very happy to have him. He's certainly added some juice to that pass rush over the last couple of years. And number 9, a guy that I think has flown under the radar for a large chunk of his NFL career, despite playing for a pretty well-known team. It's Ryan Kerrigan of the Redskins. I've been a big fan of his since he came out of college. I was hoping the Bucs would pick him up that year. Unfortunately, the Redskins snagged him just before we were on the clock. He's been a very productive player, very consistent. Again, as unlike Beasley, this is a very well-balanced player. Plays the run and the pass equally well. Perhaps not the most explosive edge rusher. Definitely not the most explosive edge rusher on this list. His game is a bit more of a technical one, but he's persistent and consistent, which are two wonderful traits to have. I think he, rather than physical ability being one of his primary tools, this is a guy that understands situations and technique and plays the right way. He plays a very disciplined rush game. A lot of his sacks come on, great hustle and effort plays. You've got to pay attention to this guy because he tends to make big plays in big moments in games as well. I think the lack of flash to his game has probably led to him flying somewhat under the radar. As I say, you're not going to see too many plays where he just wins straight off the snap and just tears around the edge of the tackle before they've even moved, or just ball rushes a guy straight into the quarterback. That's not really his game. But again, this is a very good all-round player that would be an asset to any team in the league. So he makes it onto this list. Sticking within the division for the player at number 8 on my list. Another guy, sack numbers have never come to him, but he's been one of the better pass rushers in the league for a few years now, and that is Brandon Graham of the Eagles. I really liked him coming out of college as well. I thought he'd get a lot more sacks because he's got some of that speed and burst to his game. Oddly, it's never really happened for him in that regard. He gets a lot of pressure and plays the run a heck of a lot better than I thought he would. He plays it very, very aggressive on the edge. I think maybe that discipline that some of these guys play with possibly does hinder their sack numbers, but I think it gives them a better all-round game. I'd rather have guys that play the run on the way to the quarterback rather than sell out if I was a defensive coordinator. And yeah, this guy, tons of hurries, tons of pressures, especially over the last couple of seasons. Helps that defense out, immeasurably. Very, very good at securing the edge. He's a lot more powerful than he looks. That's absolutely been the case, and he can get inside on tackles with good effectiveness, even if it, as I say, doesn't necessarily result in sacks too often for him. This is a guy that he's been paid. I think he's been tagged, and he'll be paid. Teams, I think, are starting to look, or have started to look further beyond the numbers, especially when it comes to pressure. Sacks are not necessarily that easy to get. They're very situational. Pressure, though, pressure is key. I would rather have a guy that gets me 5 or 6 pressures in a game than a guy that might get me a sack and not do anything else. So yeah, Graham, incredibly valuable, one of the most disruptive presences in the league. He makes the list at number 8. Coming at number 7, this player could fall off, not going to lie, but I wouldn't bet on it. That is Cameron Wake. Came back last year from a torn Achilles. I think it was a torn Achilles. Whatever it was, either way, a major injury. He's 35 now, undersized player, and yeah, he's still an absolute menace. Maybe not quite he had the best get off in football when he was a bit younger. It's still still very much present, may not be the absolute best at this point in time. That player who I say has that does turn up on this list, and unfortunately it's not Cameron Wake, but yeah, this is a heck of a player. Covered him in my top 100 list this week, as I mentioned there. Can beat a lot of tackles just off the snap, especially some of the slower right tackles. He's made a living off those guys over the course of his career. A lot more powerful than he looks. Sometimes these undersized guys, they've got that leverage to be able to just get underneath some of these taller tackles if they get a really good get off and just bull them if they've got the strength. Cameron Wake absolutely does. Plays the run well, which I didn't think he'd be able to do when he was signed initially from the CFL. Looked a little small to me. Turns out that's not a big problem for him. And at this point, he's just a really difficult pass rush to deal with. Whilst, as I say, the burst isn't quite as explosive. It's still explosive, but not absolutely the tops in the league. He has become a real technician. Was pretty early on. Great hand usage. An array of moves. Uses just about every trick in the book. He must be an absolute nightmare to prepare for. Real effort player. Love watching him play. He's superb. Comes in at 7, partly on age. Otherwise, he could certainly be higher up on this list. And number 6, I think this is a guy that could certainly end up higher on this list for next year. He didn't play too much last season, coming off an injury, and that is Justin Houston. This guy is an absolute menace. I think his game is probably the closest to reminding me of what the Steelers used to have. The him and Harley combination probably been the best version of that in the last few years, when the Steelers used to have Lamar Woodley and James Harrison. Yeah, it's probably the closest to it. And yeah, Houston has just been an absolute powerhouse for this team. Plays the run fantastically well. Is just a big, tough edge defender who happens to have incredible speed and quickness. Again, this is a guy that just blows by defenders on the edge. You don't want to single him up too much because he can beat you with speed or strength. Seen guys, I've seen him just annihilate running backs in the same way you'd see some of those old videos of Lawrence Taylor doing it. You're going to have to... He needs to be assisted with, because he's just got too much physical talent to be dealt with one-on-one by the vast majority of tackles in this league. As I say, he can do all that whilst playing the run. Again, this is a guy of exceptional hand placement and hand fighting skills to just keep blockers off him, and eventually his speed will win the day against most guys. So he's a fantastic player, could certainly be higher. A player that is probably a newcomer to this list, maybe wouldn't have made it in the past, but had a great season last year for the Cardinals. Chandler Jones coming in at number 5. Yeah, he was great last year. I thought he was a good player with the Patriots, but he didn't jump off the screen. Was a solid edge defender who'd chip in with some pass rush. Wasn't enormously consistent in that regard. Last year, he absolutely was. Him and Marcus Golden were menaces. One of the best edge defenders in the league, in my opinion, Jones, and has been for most of his career. His size, his length, and general athleticism make it very, very difficult for guys to actually get on him, get any movement in the ground game. Does a good job shedding blocks, making those tackles. And this year he was just more aggressive in doing that and coming off the edge, resulted in a large amount of pressures, a lot of sacks, a lot of TFLs, just all over disruption. I think he really added to, his ball rush looked significantly better. It may have been a slight technique thing. They had him, playing from standing up more than you saw in New England, which you saw it there as well. They're a very multiple defence as well. But I think he was far more effective doing so. Played perhaps, I don't know, it just looked like he was somewhat unleashed. Maybe he didn't have as much responsibility or to think about last year, but it really resulted in his best season. As I say, length, power, and more speed than it looks. That's what sort of defines his game. Maybe not the fanciest pass rusher, but it certainly got the job done last year. I thought he had a fantastic season. Coming up next is the only rookie on the list. Joey Bosa at number 4 from, what's now the LA Chargers. I mean, an unbelievable season. I was very surprised, especially after missing all of camp and that, after the disputes that he had over his contract. I mean, just an incredible season. Most of the Chargers games you saw, he looked like the best defender on that team, and they got some good talent there. I mean, Hayward had a great season. Melvin Ingram's a very good player, as I discussed before. Bosa just clearly outshone them. Great numbers. You don't often see rookie pass rushers just come in and dominate from day one. This guy did. Again, played the run pretty well, but just his get off and motor in terms of that pass rush. You could see it from the interior, you could see it from the exterior. Just, man, this guy's going to be good. You would have to think if he can keep his head on straight, keep developing, he's going to be a monster in this league. That division is just absurd for pass rushers, and this may be the best of them in a couple of years. I mean, you saw just about everything you could want from an edge defender there. Great effort, played pretty good technique, but his burst and his sort of initial punch were just so effective. I think he caught a lot of guys by surprise, and just there were some games where he was just absolutely dominant. So yeah, heck of a player, Mr. Joey Bosa. Coming in at number 3, sticking out west and heading to Seattle for the biggest mistake the Buccaneers made in the last several years. Michael Bennett, the defensive end. Great player. Again, versatility there. He's always been a very good run player. Even when he was in Tampa, wasn't necessarily getting the sack numbers because he was part of a bad line, but he played the run superbly there. That's carried over. His pass rush ability has gone up, another level. They move him to the interior. He's still effective there. I mean, this guy just does everything well. Again, not the most explosive player. You can see, particularly with Cliff Averill on the other side. He's not a pure speed rusher. He's a bit of a, all-rounder, but good technique. Clearly got great film habits. Just very rarely puts a foot wrong in terms of choosing how to attack the blocker. He's been superb for a number of years. This defence looks so different without him because of the multiple roles that they use him in. That's very difficult to replicate or replace, and he's just a major asset to that team. As I say, still remains a great edge defender in terms of the run. Gets plenty of pressures, gets some sacks. What more can you want from a defender, really? This team doesn't look the same without him. Moving on to number 2. You can probably guess who the remaining 2 players are at this point. Number 2, I've got the reigning Defensive Player of the Year, Khalil Mack of the Oakland Raiders. I still think he's pretty raw as a pass rusher. To be honest, wins a lot with just pure physical ability. Mean ball rusher. Obviously got a great get off. I mean, this guy can fly off the ball, and he often just uses that to translate speed into power and then just fight his way through blocks. If he can and against the run, he's just ferocious against the run. Again, converts speed to power and just sheds a guy pretty much whenever he wants. Just gets guys off balance so well, and really attacks blockers in a way like I remember Bart Scott used to do. Slightly different manner, but it's that kind of aggression and attitude in it, and he lights guys up. I think he's probably the best edge defender in the league right now against the run, and his pass rush ability is very good, even though I think most of it is natural. If he can get a bit more nuance, add a few more techniques to his game, he possibly has the most upside of anyone on this list. What was there to say? He did everything for the Raiders last year. Being able to play him at linebacker as well just shows you the kind of athlete that he is, that he can contribute there, and from a defensive end spot. It's a phenomenal player. But coming in at number 1, just because I think if you're a tackle, this is the guy you probably least want to deal with in terms of protecting your QB, Von Miller of the Denver Broncos. I think he's got the best get off in the league. I think that counts for a lot when you're talking about pass rushers. Maybe not quite as disciplined against the run as some of these guys, but he still does a pretty good job of that. But he's developed an array of moves. When you combine that with the get off, general power, and his kind of relentlessness, I think, again, this is one of those where having a veteran like DeMarcus Ware there probably helped him massively with his study habits and developing some of his technique. It's clearly paid off. He's become, I think, the most fearsome pass rusher in the league. If you've got a guy like we saw in that Super Bowl, but we've seen it for the last 2-3 years, if you've got a guy that can't deal with him, you have to have 2 on him all game, because he just will not lose to an inferior player. And he'll, make big plays. It'll be TFLs, there'll be sacks, fumbles, all of that will come. Yeah, he's an absolute menace. I mean, you can just win so often with pure speed that you've really got a game plan to take away that element of his game. And even if you put him inside, he's such a good technician and such a persistent rusher that he will get there in the end. So there we have it. That's my top 10 exterior pass rushers currently in the NFL. Some honourable mentions is a bit of a tough one. I really like Melvin Ingram. I think he's a very, very good player. Jason Pierre-Paul had a great season. He could have made it for sure. Possibly, I don't think Olivier Vernon did quite enough as a rusher for me. He did a good job. He was certainly close, but I'd probably put Pierre-Paul ahead of him. The 2 guys in Houston, I thought they were both fantastic last year. Similarly, you can make a similar argument for the guys in Tennessee, in Iraq Poe and Morgan. So I think those are some of the guys that I considered, but I'm pretty happy with that top 10. But as always, let me know what you guys think, whether it's about the contracts, the players that I think need to be re-signed. Do you have any additions? Do you agree, disagree with what I've said? Similar with the pass rushers, let me know, whether it's the comment section below. Find me on Facebook at Cover Zero. Find me on Twitter at Simon Conboy. I'll be more than happy to respond to each and every one of you. And yeah, as always, if you've enjoyed it, like, share, subscribe, check out the Patreon. Check out some more of the videos. I've done a fair bit this week. Similar sort of stuff coming up next week. Hope you enjoy all of that. Thank you very much for checking this out. It's been a pleasure as always. Have a great day and go Bucks.